Hey there, welcome to episode 114 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at very late in the day, 6:06 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here in Greater Vegas on this Wednesday, January 14, 2026. We normally publish earlier in the day on Wednesdays, so that's life. You get what you pay for, right? No, I was thinking about some things today about this and future episodes, like just trying to gather up some topics. So today is Perspectives, the title of today's episode. Perspectives, the way we see things. If you're not familiar with quaggling sand, it is a term I coined when I was very young. It is my perspective on what you might otherwise call pins and needles, the return of sensation after circulation was somehow blocked, maybe a foot or a hand, maybe you were sleeping or sitting funny, hilarious perhaps. So the pins and needles, quaggling sand, the swirling memories, sometimes like pins and needles. Anyway, so that's it, quaggling sand. Feel free to use it. You might impress people with your knowledge of such a technical term. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary, which I'll read to you. It is one sentence. And the links for today's episode, there are no episode links, so it's only the show links, the same two. I've tried to cut down on the amount of time I spend going over the same links every week. So on that note, let's get started so we can get finished, so I can publish this on Wednesday. The summary of today's episode. I talk about this a lot in my FFS Talk audio program, which you should listen to if you haven't, by the way. The various points of view we can find online and how informed they may or may not be, and the impact some have with these so-called influencers. I don't know if that sounds right. With these, via so-called influencers. How informed they may or may not be, and the impact some have via so-called influencers. It's not bad. It's not exactly right, but it's close enough. The links, as usual, the Quaggling Sand homepage, quagglingsand.com, and the profile page linking everything, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You can go there and listen to Buy Me an Update on Mondays and so on and so on. If you've been here before, you've heard all these. If not, the links are in the episode description, and you can click on them and you'll figure it out. On with the show. So yeah, what am I talking about? How about an example or examples? By way of example, perhaps this is a weird topic for today, but I think this is one of those formative things from my early days when, my early days that ripple through my many aspects of life today. Ripples. This is one of those things that ripples through my many aspects of my life today. Yeah, I guess that works. Back then, I basically lived with my grandmother, my mom's mother, my mother's mother, since both of my parents were working when I was very young. Like, we're talking low single digits. Back in Jersey, New Jersey, in fact, with cold and snowy winters, humid summers, and busy days, those were the days. I was the oldest of this grandparents' grandkids. Forgot the apostrophe in there. Me as well. I was the oldest, which plays a role here, for better or worse. All of my grandparents were worthy of a lot more stories, also for better or worse. Now, to say I was a little bit spoiled by Betty, we'll call her, would be something of an understatement. And this was generally the way things were for as long as I knew her. I spent a lot less time with each passing year, but generally speaking, she did not treat other people as she treated me and my uncle, as it turns out, my mother's brother, who unfortunately is now dead. He was the youngest of the three children. My mom, my aunt, who's also dead, and my uncle. My uncle was it 9 years older than me? I think so. Yeah, I think it was 9 years older than me. So it's like we were the same generation almost. If you, whatever. If you are picking up on some old school bias on the part of Betty, people of that ilk, you're probably correct, but we don't need to go down that road today. From my perspective, Betty was great. I should have nothing to complain about. Always preparing the foods, the typical Ray Romano grandmother stories. Are you hungry? What can I cook for you? What can I make for you? What can I do for you? However, Betty was also a monster who treated most people, including other members of my family and others within her family in general, and then people in the world, with vitriol and contempt. Now, I'm going to interrupt myself here and say that Betty also put on a sort of a performative, nice person out in public with the general population. So I'm sure if we asked, someone on the street, what do you think of Betty? They'd say, I don't know, she helped me with that thing because, where she worked at the time. Always been nice to me, but they barely know her, right? So they've had a good experience, but they don't really know. So people who did know her, they knew her. But I would come to know her more later. So she was a monster. I could have ignored all this and gone with what suited me, which is, she always gives me whatever I want, really. Or what actually happened, I watched all of this and came away disappointed in this person, Betty, and how she actually behaved. She was probably being her real self most of the time, putting on a friendly social face for the day-to-day, engagements with casual people, casual engagements and relationships and so on, workplace and other, grocery store, etc., right? And then, of course, treating me differently again. The take home, what I see before me is an interesting starting point. Oh, Betty's always nice to me, but not always the whole story. Oh, but she's a monster to other people. If something smells funny, check for gas. And that was a good start to how I interact with some people. So watch and listen is the mantra. What is this? Who types this stuff? As I made my way through the school years from, elementary school is a little iffy when it comes to observation of social engagements. We haven't really gone through social psychology yet that young, but, certainly through high school, the best days of our lives, I was learning a little bit more each year about how social interactions worked, especially around perception or even who was telling a more rational, truthful story, whether it was believable and so on. This is always a skill to work on because I think it is easy to want to believe the more believable version for whatever reason. While often it's a good idea to take in the stories, plural, and see where things appear to actually come to rest, right? Eventually, it could take a while, but eventually you will begin to see, that person I was buying their whole story, but now I'm starting to notice a couple of cracks in the tail, and then more light shines through and so on. When I went off to college, living in a dorm situation on the social side and then engaging in a challenging curriculum on the academic side, with the very same people I was living with, by the way, made for a lot of interaction scenarios and behaviors about which to take note, for myself anyway. A full spectrum view of a lot of people over long periods of time, years of living with people, roommates in a very, very tiny fraction of that population. But, our dorm had 88 people. Our entire college had a charter maximum, I think, of 800 students. And I think we had about 600. My class size started at 151 and ended at 118. But it was among the 5 Claremont colleges, so there were other students. Anyway, so we're not talking millions of people here. We're talking hundreds, dozens, hundreds, right? So you have an interesting view over a long period of time in a living and working situation, right? Dorm life, on-campus social events, and so on, and then academia. So you get a pretty broad spectrum, a full spectrum view of a lot of people over long periods of time. I should say broad spectrum, not full spectrum, because there's always the hidden parts. But long periods of time, months and years, is itself an education. As the saying goes, I have never let my schooling interfere with my education. You go get it, Mark Twain. So yeah, the schoolwork, the academia was an aspect of it, but surely, the other 18 hours a day had a lot of insight was gleaned, knowledge was gleaned. Anyway, in those early days, the internet was just coming together. We're talking pre-1993. The internet was just coming together. From a technical perspective, it was already in place, but the finer points were getting finer. So a consolidation of different interconnect protocols and so on. I always use BitNet as an example because I actually was using some BitNet networking, but the internet as we know it today was sort of a joining of various networks and technologies and protocols and so on. So everything kind of came together, enabling what we, I guess, for better or worse, what we have today. So email, news, IRC, Internet Relay Chat, and file transfers, FTP, file transfer protocol. So we were emailing, so email, SMTP, news, NNTP, IRC, and FTP, a lot of P. We're at our disposal, not to mention Telnet. We're at our disposal all day and all night when I was in college. This meant that the vast majority of interaction was taking place in person amongst those dozens and hundreds of people, as I mentioned, or possibly via email or similar means to communicate with, say, former classmates from high school, colleagues at other schools that we may have encountered here and there, and so on and so on. So we were mostly communicating with words, not completely, but essentially send people messages, text, words, letters, sometimes files. Those are the early days. Enter the parasocial. So I had my first exposure to the World Wide Web while working at Apple in 1993. My second job after graduating college, when I worked at Apple starting in November of 1993, I think it was. And a college classmate who had gone on to UT Austin to pursue his PhD sent me an email, I think it was probably email, suggesting that I check out this thing called Mosaic, NCSA Mosaic. And the rest is history. Mosaic, of course, would go on to become Internet Explorer, but the people who developed Mosaic would go on and develop Netscape Navigator. And the rest is history. Luckily, the rise to what we see today was slow to start. So those of us in those early days had time to understand what was happening. But I would say it did accelerate. So if you are a millennial, if you're a Gen Y millennial, you probably jumped in as it was getting pretty fast. And then Gen Z, it was already here, this kind of stuff. So yeah, the Gen Xers, the baby boomers, they and we and they got to experience the initially slow rise of some of this stuff. So it's a little bit easier to see some of it unfolding if you're paying attention. As we know, this is wait, I totally jumped into the middle of a sentence. It did accelerate. So moments ago, I said we were making use of the internet using mostly text with more than that, taking a while with some technical challenges. As we know, this has changed drastically today. In the early days with audio files and real-time audio sharing online, when I was working at Netscape, shoutcasting was a thing. So you could actually multicast your internet radio program, for example. What was the other one? Was it Real Video, Real Media, Real Audio, Real? I think it was Real Audio, and then anyway. So these technologies of streaming things, always open connections and so on, or long-term connections, very interesting. These were the early days. Image sharing was already becoming mainstream. The days of sharing multi-part internet mail extension encapsulated files across Usenet News to share photos with people was migrating eventually to serving content online, maybe eventually clicking on a link to an image and downloading it. And fun fact, when I was working at Netscape, that was just part of work. So you could walk by somebody's cube and they're looking at an image that you would say, whoa, that doesn't seem like that seems not safe for work. But this was the nature of the internet in those days. It had, you were testing various image sources and whatnot. And there was some really awful stuff that was sort of part of the game was seeing how our internet browser was behaving on the internet. So for better or worse. So image sharing had already become pretty mainstream. The thing with an image is it's a one shot, right? You're getting a picture and you're done. Technically, a picture is kind of like getting a giant web page, a giant piece of text. It just turns into an image. getting real-time streaming, right? I want to hear an audio program that's just going to keep going. It's being created on one end live and then being sent to me through the internets mysteriously, and then it arrives and it has to be assembled. There are things called UDP, Universal Datagram packets, that don't necessarily arrive in the order that they were sent. So the entire notion of assembling a live real-time stream of audio into something that actually sounded the way it started out was non-trivial. So all that sort of happened. And then video, small videos were not far behind, and eventually motion JPEG gave way to MPEG, gave way to whatever we have today, H.264 or something. I haven't even looked at the newest and latest, with experiments in fractal compression and everything. All very cool. So the whole idea was to be able to communicate your video messages to people, right? Usually a stored video production was still not cheap. I've mentioned this before. I worked at True Vision, which was a sort of a prosumer video content creation and editing platform, or the hardware for that, with Pinnacle and Avid and all that. So yeah, I was in on some of that. So image sharing was relatively easy by comparison. Real-time audio sharing, video streaming, real-time video content creation, all these things would develop at an accelerating rate. And you see where we've arrived so far. And as you may have noticed, they have come very far. Very long way since the 90s. I worked at Netscape in 96, 97, 98. I think it was 98. I don't know. I could check my CV, but it's somewhere in there. Mid to late 90s. I think I told the story of Share Video, the startup idea I almost joined in on with one of my True Vision colleagues before YouTube. So it was almost certainly too early from a technology perspective. YouTube was already cutting it really thin on what was possible. They could have flamed out very early if people said, this kind of sucks. But they said, this kind of sucks, but it doesn't suck enough to abandon. So YouTube was able, and then they got bought by Google, and the rest is a very weird history. So yeah, we were going to do Share Video essentially so that this person who was trying to start this could share video of he and his wife had a child, and their parents, the child's grandparents, were in Europe. And if there's one thing that will sell a product to older people, it is making some sort of a connection to their grandchildren. Except for Betty. She probably, that would have been a special case. So Share Video, that was the main product goal. There was too much disagreement amongst the various people, including myself, about how to best get this off the ground, so to speak. And eventually it all kind of fell in on itself, and the rest is not history. But the aim was simple. People like seeing faces and movement. They can connect with these. This is sort of our evolutionary biology in action, to be able to see if you are talking to someone, if you can look at them, you can see them. That's a big chunk of communication is nonverbal. So it's gesturing. It's whether they're looking into the camera, which is, of course, kind of weird because you're not looking at a person. So that kind of throws off. But from a perception standpoint, people that are watching that, you're looking them in the eye or you're not. So there's probably some psychology to that I will not venture into since that's not my field. But the aim was simple. They like seeing faces and movement. We all do. We connect with these, and today we can see very easily that the parasocial relationships formed between a viewing audience and a TikToker, a YouTuber, or other video presenters is nothing to dismiss. Is video a requirement? Well, I hope not. This program, for example, is about telling stories, reflecting, not really trying to convince anyone of anything. So making a parasocial connection is not first and foremost. You can listen to this on a treadmill while you're driving, right? So video really pays off when you want to make that connection. So parasocial being like, we don't actually know each other, but it seems like we do because I'm looking right at you and I'm talking to you and I'm telling you things you want to hear. You know me, right? You've heard my stories. You've heard what I have to say, and you develop a certain level of trust, and you might tell people, oh, I know who Dan Hugo is. Maybe, maybe not. But the parasocial relationship, that connection, helps to build and maintain that audience, and your audience will become your supporters. And that's where you run into some trouble when there's internet fighting, YouTubers going on YouTubers, uh, going after each other, right? So-and-so said this and they're wrong. And so their fans believe that they are on the team. And so they will engage sometimes in troubling and sometimes in dangerous behaviors against the perceived enemy. And that is the nature of the bifurcation of our online world, which can sometimes escape into the real world, right? Well, that's where perception really, really becomes important. Important. Yeah, I make fun of that pronunciation. So trash TV at scale. This will probably, some people will recall these times. Other people will just imagine that this is the normal thing now. There's nothing special about this. So I don't know if you remember some of these characters. Morton Downey Jr., certainly a character. Morton Downey Jr. Probably kicked off the idea. I think he is given some credit for basically establishing or making mainstream the notion of trash TV. If you're not familiar with Morton Downey Jr., you maybe came a little bit later with Jerry Springer. He's certainly famous. There are other characters. Others ran with the whole notion. It's shock TV. It's saying things, bringing on guests, yelling, arguing, fighting, not really debating, not intellectual, more impassioned, angry. So you basically take the Phil Donahue daytime talk format, which was more about deliberation and conversation. He was unabashedly left-leaning, so some people may out the gate think he was a communist or something, who knows. But you take that format, panel on the stage and a live audience asking questions and so on, and bring in some yelling and confrontation, maybe throwing a chair now and then, getting into some fisticuffs, and you get some real emotional engagement. And that is how you maintain your audience, with that emotional engagement. Even popular radio personalities, your Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh characters, for example, would get on TV, right? Radio, they were doing fine. They were built huge audiences. Rush Limbaugh had a bigger audience than Howard Stern, but the two of them were certainly well known. There were others. There were others that were pretty close, that had come up through in that same time frame, same radio engagement. And then, you got the Howard Stern on E, and you had Rush Limbaugh. And I cannot remember how he entered television, but he was also visible, so he could perform for a camera, video audience, looking into a camera, and still have his radio audience. You kind of had both. And you still have that today. People can listen, pick a YouTuber if they publish their content as audio only on Apple Podcasts, or that enables people to listen while they're driving, while they're at the gym, while they're walking, etc. So you can attract and maintain a broader audience. So this started back then, arguably, probably before. So now TV, radio, and more likely live streams and video on demand. So you can watch it live, get in on a chat, or you can watch it later at your leisure. And this, by the way, this is not the things you happen to record on your VCR or your TiVo, but anything, anytime. And it will be delivered to you through some algorithm to make sure that I want to click on this also. So they've enabled anyone to build an audience and spread a message to as far and wide as the internet is. How best to build an audience? Well, spread a message they want to hear, of course, and monetize it. Wash, rinse, repeat, right? So since we are now making use of confirmation bias and motivated reasoning to build and maintain audiences, the responsibility rests with the members of the audience, like me and you, to examine the message or messages and try to balance the different viewpoints, the different motivations, the different agendas. Today, it is far too easy to spend all day either consuming one side or one part of one side of a story or an event or a circumstance. Or you could also try to spend all of your days trying to get multiple sides. Either way, it is a full-time job now because the internet and our various technologies, some of which I worked on a little bit back in the days, which is not lost on me. I use them, but I was working at Netscape on web browser. I was working at TrueVision on enabling people to create content from their desk, video content. Where else did I work? I worked at salons. I worked in a highly politically oriented news outlet. I was not engaged in the news side. We were on the publishing technology side. But yeah, my various pursuits touched on a lot of the things that we use today in the early days. So I look at some of this stuff sometimes and I'm like, maybe that was not a good idea. For the sake of the stock options, I think I've done an episode on chasing stock options and how that was a bad idea. So all these things, though, they provide a direct feed from any notion directly into your mind, maybe into your amygdala, into your base reptilian response, right? Evokes an emotional response if you're down with the Voight-Kampff. So there can be real drama too. So this is not a result of the internet, but now I mentioned my awful Betty, my grandmother, who seemed to hate everyone except for a small number of people. Maybe I was one of those, apparently. Fast forward to 2013, when a friend of mine who happened to be a bartender was in a similar situation as I was after my house fire around that time, such that moving to somewhere else was the goal. Like, hey, we should be roommates. We should move somewhere and we can cut down on costs. This was Silicon Valley after all. And maybe we would be roommates if we did eventually move. And yes, we did move in together to Vegas for a change of scenery. I had known this person for probably like 5 years before that decision and the move. Now, it became very clear in there somewhere that this person whom I had known for so long was not at all the pleasant person most would have believed her to be. Quite the opposite. In fact, quite the opposite. However, for any customer who was a regular at a bar at which she was working, and I met some of these people when we were both living in Silicon Valley, so I knew a couple of the different places that she had worked over the years, and oh yeah, great, the best, etc. The best of the best sometimes. But would any of them believe for a moment the real story that she was also a monster? I apparently have a magnet for attracting monsters closer to me. No, of course not. They would never have bought any of that. It was on month 3 after moving to Vegas that I moved on secretly from any interactions. Any interactions with this person had to be blocked. I never went legal route, but and restraining orders and so on. But yeah, it was time to get out of there. And you can fill in some of those blanks if you like, but just an awful human being. And over time, she has made more and more a dent in the Vegas area. Luckily, on the other side of town from me, never far enough, but more southwest. I'm more north central, perhaps, with various restraining orders and other actions that are visible online. Right, public actions. I have played no part in any of that. Avoidance is the rule of the day. But I will say from observation that getting the truth out or discovering it can take a while, as has been the case here. If I had, I don't remember when I first saw some news item, if I had gone to the other side of this news story and said, hey, let me let you in on some details about this person that you're about to get into some legal tangle with. They would have said, who are you? What do you know? Then they discover it, right? So the more people discover, the more they go, oh yeah, I wish you could have told me this earlier. This is tiny. Like with Betty, a bad person who is not bad at all from some viewpoints. If you don't know them, or if you've never had that experience, to you, you're thinking, what's the big deal? Does the truth come out? Maybe eventually, or maybe not. It could be a truly frustrating thing, as it was with me for a while, but the more distance in time and space that can be taken advantage of, the less impact these sorts of things have. So, but it's still a good learning experience. So why even bring this up? Why even bring this up? Pick your side or consume from the buffet. There is plenty of all sorts of information bits flowing freely in these modern times. It reminds me of the things I've mentioned here and in general, where people hear what they want to hear. They take from that what agrees with them. Oh, Betty's fine. Oh, this is my favorite bartender. What are you talking about? and they cannot be convinced otherwise. Suddenly, everybody is a virologist, a constitutional scholar, an attorney, a ballistics expert, and so on. They know, and they watch so-and-so on the internet, and they've confirmed all of their notions. So I continue to listen to them because they keep telling me I'm right. Arguing becomes pointless in these scenarios, with most commentary now reducible to constrained length clips on the platform of choice. Maybe you're a Twitter person, maybe you're a Blue Sky person. I've kind of given up on both of those. Choice that is a reflection of ideology at this point. If I said it's essentially the same as Bushmills versus Jameson, some of you may go, oh yeah, probably. The news of the day so far, every day for 2026, unfortunately, has been along these same lines, with so much of the stories really bifurcated along ideological lines. If you are on the right, you probably believe this because the stories that are told on the right are taking this viewpoint, and they share some of the details that are relevant and which bolster those viewpoints and so on. Someone on the left might be thinking, what are you talking about? And vice versa. It's the same sort of like, and I've talked about this before, the culture game. I'll talk about that in more detail. I've talked about this before, the silent card game, and it's actually a product that you can purchase, but it's, are you playing the same game I am? And it turns out you're not. That's part of the exercise, because you cannot speak when you're playing this card game. You sit at one table, you play a card game according to some set of rules, and then they have everybody change tables without sharing the rules of the table they are going to. So when they begin playing this game, you get a lot of kerfuffle as the first hand is dealt, and people start saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is not the game I was playing. This is not no, these are the rules. So everybody gets a different viewpoint of what they're supposed to be playing, what the rules really are, and nobody agrees. And there's no more rule sheets. Those have been collected and taken away. So now you're just going by, well, I read the thing before, and well, that's not the rules here. That may be the rules over there, but not over here. So I kind of see this replaying itself all the time now. Like the bartender patrons, do not even try to argue the point on their territory. Hey, you're sitting at our table now. The rules are these. And I would say, well, but over there, and they say, who cares? This is our place. This is our favorite bartender. What are you talking about? Maybe you should leave. Like trying to convince anyone who really knew her that Betty was actually just fine, which of course she was not. So I would be wrong. It is a fruitless pursuit, and ultimately one based on, with Betty, untruth with the bartender situation. They didn't know the secret story, right? They get the bartender story, not the behind the scenes story, right? So everybody has a fractional view of reality. And those who have, and if we can get into Plato's cave at some point if you want to, like, no, it's really awful. And you're like, well, I'm looking at these shadows on the cave wall and everything seems fine to me. Great. And that's an argument that is not even worth pursuing. A fruitless pursuit indeed. So this has been this story. So this is my final bullet item of the final point. So this episode, this has been more of a reflection on current events than a story, I guess. I told a couple of stories that get me to they get me to modernity. They get me to modern times, I suppose. As I said, I have been involved in some of the parts of some of the development of some of the technologies that have enabled some of this stuff at scale. I'm not saying it's my fault, but I am saying, boy, I didn't see any of this coming. And I think probably the people who did were capitalizing, profiting, not necessarily. Ooh, production by a street. It was about profit and stock option, wins and so on. Betty and the bartender are minor examples, with very serious manipulated bifurcation happening on the regular now. Literally, events in Minneapolis, events in different parts of the world. It's actually crazy, to coin a phrase. It can be exhausting if we let it be exhausting. In the meantime, I continue to look for more than one side of this story, and I hope you do also. So yeah, I tend to consume. I read a lot. You can watch YouTube videos. You'll get a lot of spin, almost a lot of creative, selective confirmation biased language. Now I didn't say it like this. You are in trouble if you are getting news and information from someone, especially if they're a paid reporter, if they say things like, well, this is happening. Well, of course, as we all know, they'll make these expressions that are casual. Maybe you'd hear someone say that if you're, water cooler conversation, maybe just in social settings. So, well, this is so they make this presumption that, well, you're, and it's more psychological than literal. You know what I'm saying. You know the story. Of course, this is what's happening. Well, obviously, and that's the best one. Obviously, well, no, you're a reporter. You're a presenter on TV. You're interviewing someone, person on the street or a sit-down interview or something. Obviously, to the audience, no. You are telling or sharing information or a perspective. Obvious is not necessarily true. You cannot make that presumption. So I notice these sorts of things. So I try not to lean too much on highly ideological, one-sided perspective, advocacy, masquerading as news, and so on. It's very tricky, but yeah, I guess this has been a thing on my mind for decades, and it just has to be. You have to be aware of it. You have to be paying attention, and it can be very frustrating to be the person trying to say, like, wait a minute, this is not. If you actually look at the story and you read the details and you do a little bit of research on how the science works, and then somebody saying, oh, no, I heard, somebody said, obviously, and stuff like that. I used to say and stuff like that a lot. Anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you for listening, as always. It's about 40 minutes on my clock. We'll see what it gets down to when I truncate some silence, some pregnant pauses. But yeah, thanks for listening, and always consume from multiple sources on multiple sides of a thing, a topic, an event, a notion. Do not trust one person to provide all of your information to you, or one news network. Yeah, spread it around. Many sources of information to take advantage of, so do so. Make use of this internet that we were building back then. Put it to the use it was intended. All right, that's all I have to say for now. Take care. Talk to you later.